You're throwing your life away on some ridiculous fantasy. Get out and don't come back, my mom screamed, her face twisted with rage as she pointed toward the front door. The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing through our family home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I stood there in the living room, my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder, staring at the woman who had raised me but never truly understood me. My name is Jenna Hale. I'm 28 years old, and I had just made the mistake of telling my parents about my decision to leave my corporate accounting job to focus full-time on my online business. What I hadn't told them, what they couldn't have imagined, was that for the past 2 years and 3 months, I had been the one secretly paying their mortgage. Every month, I transferred $2,400 from my business account to their bank, making sure they never lost the house they loved so much. But standing there, watching my mother's face contort with disappointment and my father's silent nod of agreement, I realized that my financial support meant nothing if they couldn't respect my choices. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were rejecting the very person who had been keeping them afloat. "Mom, if you would just listen for 1 minute," I started, but she cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "I don't want to hear another word about your little computer games," she spat. "You had a good job with benefits, security, a future, and you threw it all away for what? To play on the internet all day?" My father, Gerald, finally spoke up from his position by the fireplace. "Your mother's right, Jenna. This isn't what we raised you for. We expected more from you." The disappointment in his voice was worse than my mother's anger. I had always been closer to my dad, and hearing him dismiss my dreams felt like a betrayal. What made it even more painful was knowing that without my monthly payments, they would lose this house within weeks. The very roof over their heads depended on the success of the computer games they were mocking. "Fine," I said quietly, shouldering my bag more securely. "I'll go." My mother, Patricia, looked surprised that I wasn't fighting back, but her expression quickly hardened again. "Good. Maybe some time on your own will help you come to your senses." As I walked toward the door, I turned back one last time. "You know what, Mom? Maybe it will." There was something in my voice that made both of them pause, but they said nothing as I stepped out into the cold October evening, closing the door behind me with a finality that would soon change all our lives. Growing up in the Hale household had always been about meeting expectations. My parents, both in their early 60s now, had built their lives around traditional ideas of success and security. My father worked for 35 years as an insurance claims adjuster, and my mother had been an elementary school secretary until her retirement 3 years ago. They owned a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, complete with a well-maintained garden that was my mother's pride and joy. What they didn't know was that their comfortable retirement was largely an illusion. My father's pension was smaller than they had anticipated, and my mother's medical bills from her diabetes had eaten into their savings. I discovered this by accident 2.5 years ago when I stopped by to help them with their computer and saw past due notices scattered across my father's desk. That night, I went home to my apartment and made a decision that would define our relationship for years to come. I had been building my graphic design business, Sunspire Digital, since college, working nights and weekends while maintaining my day job. The business had grown beyond my wildest expectations, bringing in nearly $8,000 a month. Setting up an anonymous monthly transfer to my parents' mortgage company seemed like the natural thing to do. I told myself I would eventually reveal the truth, but somehow the right moment never came. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual phone call was an opportunity I let slip by. Maybe I enjoyed being their secret guardian angel, or maybe I was afraid they would reject my help if they knew it came from my hobby business. My relationship with my younger brother, Tyler, had always been complicated. At 25, he was their golden child, married to his college sweetheart, working as a high school teacher, living what our parents considered a proper, stable life. Tyler and his wife, Stephanie, lived in a modest apartment across town and visited every Sunday for family dinner, a tradition I had participated in religiously until tonight. Tyler had been supportive of my business endeavors, at least privately. He understood that I had a talent for design and marketing that went far beyond what I could express in a corporate cubicle. But he also struggled with disappointing our parents, so he rarely spoke up when they criticized my choices. The warning signs of their financial trouble had been subtle but consistent. I noticed my mother buying generic groceries instead of name brands, my father mentioning that they might need to postpone their planned trip to visit my aunt in Colorado, and the way they both looked slightly stressed whenever bills came up in conversation. What I didn't anticipate was how explosive their reaction would be to my career change. I had prepared for concern, for questions about my financial stability, even for some disappointment. But I hadn't prepared for complete rejection, for being thrown out of their house like I was some kind of stranger who had violated their trust. As I drove away from their house that night, I felt a strange mixture of hurt and liberation. For the first time in years, I was free to make decisions without worrying about their approval. The first few days after leaving my parents' house passed in a blur of conflicted emotions. I threw myself into my work, completing client projects with an intensity that surprised even me. My apartment, a cozy one-bedroom space downtown, had never felt more like a sanctuary. Without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, I found myself more creative and productive than I had been in months. But beneath the surface, I was wrestling with a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Every month for more than 2 years, I had carefully scheduled that automatic transfer to their mortgage company. The next payment was due in just 3 weeks, and for the first time since I had started making them, I questioned whether I should continue. On the third day after our fight, Tyler called me. His voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "Hey, Jenna. I heard about what happened with Mom and Dad," he said. "I'm sorry it went down like that." "Are you?" I asked, not trying to hide the edge in my voice. "Because you were sitting right there when Dad agreed with everything she said." There was a long pause. "You know how they are. They just want what's best for you." "Do they? Because it feels like they want what's comfortable for them, not what's best for me." Tyler sighed. "Look, maybe you could come to Sunday dinner this week. Let things cool down a little." "I don't think so," I said. "Mom was pretty clear about not wanting me back." "She didn't mean it like that. You know how she gets when she's upset." But I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. Not this time. "Tyler, did you know that my little computer games bring in more money each month than Dad's pension?" "Really?" His surprise seemed genuine. "Really. But apparently that doesn't matter because it's not a real job." We talked for a few more minutes, but I could tell Tyler was uncomfortable with the conflict. He had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over tensions and encouraged everyone to just get along. This time, though, I wasn't interested in keeping the peace. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the banking website where I managed all my business finances. The mortgage payment was scheduled to process automatically in 17 days. All I had to do was nothing, and it would go through as usual. Or I could cancel it with a few clicks. The rational part of my mind argued that I shouldn't punish my parents financially just because they had hurt my feelings. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed and undervalued for years, whispered that maybe it was time they understood exactly how much they depended on the daughter they had just thrown away. I closed the laptop without making any changes. Not yet. But for the first time since I had started those payments, the decision felt like mine to make. 2 weeks passed without any contact from my parents. I had expected at least a phone call from my father, maybe an awkward attempt at reconciliation, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening and, honestly, more hurtful than their initial reaction had been. It confirmed what I had suspected for years, that their love came with conditions, and I had failed to meet them. During this time, my business continued to thrive. I landed a major contract with Lumerin Publishing, a Minneapolis-based company that needed a complete rebrand. The project was worth $15,000 and would keep me busy for the next 2 months. Ironically, it was exactly the kind of success that proved my parents wrong about my career choice. but I had no one to share it with. I did share the news with my best friend from college, Maya Rodriguez, during one of our weekly coffee dates. Maya had been watching the situation with my family unfold with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "I still can't believe they reacted that way," she said, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. "You're literally living your dream and making good money doing it. What more do they want?" "They want me to be safe," I replied. "They want me to have a traditional job with a traditional life path that they can understand and explain to their friends. But you're 28 years old. When do you get to make your own choices?" Maya's indignation on my behalf was comforting, but it also highlighted how isolated I felt from my own family. She had been encouraging me to tell my parents about the mortgage payments for months, arguing that they deserved to know where their financial security was really coming from. "You know what I think you should do?" Maya said, leaning forward with the intensity she always brought to problem solving. "I think you should tell them about the mortgage, right now, before you make any decisions about stopping the payments." "Why would I do that?" I asked, though part of me was already considering it. "Because they need to understand what they're throwing away. They need to know that their successful daughter, the one they just kicked out, has been keeping them in their house." The idea was tempting, but it also felt like using money as a weapon, which wasn't who I wanted to be. Still, as the days passed and the payment date grew closer, I found myself thinking more and more about Maya's suggestion. The decision was made for me on a Thursday evening, 10 days after our fight. I was working late when my phone rang, and Tyler's name appeared on the screen. "Jenna, we need to talk," he said without preamble. His voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. "It's about Mom and Dad. Something's happened, and I think you need to know about it." My heart started racing. "Are they okay? Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that. But they got a notice from the bank today, something about their mortgage payment being late." I felt my stomach drop. "Late? What do you mean late?" "I don't really understand it all, but Dad called me in a panic. He said the bank was threatening some kind of action if they don't catch up on their payments. He asked if Stephanie and I could help them out financially." The irony was almost unbearable. Here was my father, asking Tyler for money to solve a problem that I had been preventing for more than 2 years. And Tyler had no idea that the person who could fix everything was the same person they had just rejected. "What did you tell him?" I asked carefully. "I told him we'd help if we could, but honestly, Jenna, we don't have that kind of money. A mortgage payment on their house has to be at least $2,000 a month. That's more than our rent." "Did he say anything else? About why they might be behind on payments?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. He seemed confused about it, like he thought the payments were up to date. But the bank was saying they hadn't received anything for this month. I closed my eyes, finally understanding what had happened. In my emotional state after the fight, I had forgotten that I needed to cancel the automatic payment if I didn't want it to go through. The system had tried to process it as usual, but something had gone wrong. Maybe an issue with their account, maybe a technical glitch. Either way, the payment hadn't gone through, and now my parents were facing the consequences of their financial reality. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at my phone. Tyler's call had kept me awake most of the night, wrestling with what felt like an impossible decision. On one hand, my parents had made it clear that they didn't want me in their lives. On the other hand, they were about to lose their home because of a situation they didn't even understand. I picked up my phone 3 times to call them directly, and 3 times I put it back down. What would I say? "Hi, Mom. I know you kicked me out, but surprise, I've been paying your mortgage for over 2 years. The conversation felt impossible to navigate. Instead, I called Tyler back. "I need you to do me a favor," I said when he answered. "I need you to ask Dad some specific questions about their mortgage situation." Okay, Tyler said slowly. What kind of questions? Ask him how long they've been able to make their mortgage payments without any financial strain. Ask him if he's ever wondered how they've managed to stay current while living on just his pension and Mom's Social Security. Jenna, what are you getting at? I took a deep breath. Just ask him, Tyler, and then call me back. An hour later, my phone rang again. Jenna. Tyler's voice was strange, almost whispered. Dad said something really weird. He said they've never actually made a mortgage payment themselves. He said the bank has always told them the payments were coming from some kind of automatic system set up by the mortgage company. He thought it was part of their original loan agreement. My heart sank. Of course, my parents hadn't questioned their good fortune. Of course, they had assumed that somehow, magically, their mortgage was just easier to manage than they had expected. Tyler, I said carefully, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't say anything to Mom and Dad until I decide what to do. What is it? I've been paying their mortgage for the past 2 years and 3 months. Every month I transfer money from my business account to the mortgage company. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Tyler, you've been... What? His voice was barely above a whisper. I found out they were struggling financially a few years ago, and I started making the payments anonymously. They never knew it was me. Jesus, Jenna, that's thousands of dollars. It's $57,600 to be exact. Another long silence. And you never told them? I was going to eventually. But every time I tried to bring it up, they made some comment about my business being a hobby or a waste of time. How could I tell them that my hobby was keeping them in their house? Tyler was quiet for so long that I started to worry he had hung up on me. Tyler, I'm here. I'm just processing this. So when they kicked you out, I decided maybe it was time they understood exactly what they were rejecting. So you stopped the payments. I didn't actively stop them. I just didn't fix whatever went wrong with the automatic transfer. Jenna, they could lose the house. I know. My voice was steadier than I felt. The question is, what am I supposed to do about that? They made it clear they don't want me in their lives. Tyler didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, neither did I. All I knew was that for the first time in years, my parents were about to learn what their lives looked like without the daughter they had taken for granted. 3 days later, the call I had been expecting finally came. It wasn't from my mother or father. It was from Tyler, and his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. Jenna, you need to know what's happening over here, he said. Dad called the bank this morning to try to figure out the payment situation, and they told him that for the past 2 years, the payments have been coming from an external account. Someone has been paying their mortgage, and that someone stopped this month. I felt my pulse quicken. What did he say? He was confused at first. Then he started trying to figure out who could have been helping them. He went through all their relatives, their friends, even wondered if there was some kind of mistake or if someone had the wrong account number. And? Tyler's voice dropped even lower. Mom started crying. Not angry crying, but scared crying. I think for the first time, they realized how close they've been to losing everything. The image of my mother crying hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my mom, and knowing she was scared and confused made my chest tight. Tyler, did either of them... Did they think about me at all? That's the thing, Jenna. Dad asked me if I thought you might know anything about it. He said you've always been good with money and computers, and he wondered if you might have some insight into who could have been helping them. The irony was almost painful. My father was asking for my help to solve a mystery that I had created. What did you tell him? I didn't know what to say. I told him I'd call you and see if you had any ideas. We both fell silent. I could hear Tyler breathing on the other end of the line, probably wrestling with the same moral dilemma that had been keeping me awake at night. "Jenna," he said finally, "you have to tell them. This isn't just about money anymore. They're terrified. They kicked me out, Tyler. Mom literally screamed at me to get out and never come back. I know, and that was wrong. But this is bigger than your fight about your job. They could lose their house. Then maybe they should have thought about that before they decided my life choices were more important than having me in their lives." Even as I said the words, they felt harsh. But I was tired of being the one who always had to be the bigger person, the one who had to swallow her pride and make the first move toward reconciliation. "I need time to think," I told Tyler. "The next payment isn't due for another 2 weeks. They're not going to be homeless tomorrow." "But Jenna, 2 weeks, Tyler. I need to figure out what I want to do." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like I was carrying the weight of my entire family's future. Part of me wanted to simply resume the payments and pretend none of this had happened. It would be easier, cleaner, and it would solve everyone's immediate problems. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed and undervalued for years, wanted them to understand exactly what they had lost when they chose to reject me. I wanted them to know that their financial security had depended entirely on the daughter they considered a failure. The decision I made in the next 2 weeks would define our relationship forever, and for the first time in my life, that decision was entirely mine to make. 2 weeks later, my father called me directly. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my hands shaking slightly as I pressed the accept button. "Jenna." His voice was tired, defeated in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk." "About what, Dad?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. "About our mortgage situation. The bank says someone has been making our payments for over 2 years, and then suddenly stopped this month. Tyler said you might have some idea about who could have been helping us." The moment had finally arrived. I took a deep breath, looking out the window of my apartment at the city below. "I do have some idea," I said slowly. "In fact, I know exactly who's been making your payments." "Who?" The hope in his voice was painful to hear. "Me, Dad. I've been paying your mortgage for 2 years and 3 months. Every month, $2,400 from my business account to your mortgage company." The silence stretched so long that I thought the connection had dropped. "Dad? That's..." His voice cracked. "That's impossible. Your business is just a hobby. You don't make that kind of money." "My business brings in about $8,000 a month, Dad. Those computer games Mom mocked have been keeping you in your house." I heard him put the phone down, then pick it up again. In the background, I could hear my mother asking what was wrong. "Jenna, are you telling me that all this time, the daughter you just kicked out for making irresponsible life choices has been the only reason you haven't lost your home? But why didn't you tell us?" The question I had been dreading. "Because every time I tried to talk about my business, you dismissed it. How could I tell you that my little hobby was supporting you?" Another long silence. "And when Mom told me to get out and never come back, I decided maybe it was time you learned what life looks like without the daughter you don't respect." "Jenna, please. We didn't mean..." "You did mean it, Dad. And now you're facing the consequences." The next day, both my parents showed up at my apartment building. I watched from my window as they stood outside the main entrance, my mother clutching my father's arm, both of them looking smaller and older than I remembered. They had been there for 20 minutes when I finally went downstairs. "Jenna," my mother's voice was barely a whisper. She looked like she had been crying for days. "Please, we need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "We made a mistake," my father said, his pride visibly crumbling. "A terrible mistake." "Which mistake?" Kicking me out? Or not realizing that your successful daughter was keeping you afloat? My mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. Jenna, I was wrong. About everything. Your business, your choices, the things I said to you. I was wrong. You weren't just wrong, Mom. You were cruel. You told me I was throwing my life away on fantasies while I was literally paying for your life. We didn't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. If you had known, you would have taken my money and still looked down on how I earned it. My father spoke up, his voice stronger now. That's not true. We would have been grateful. Would you? Or would you have felt ashamed that your daughter was supporting you? Would you have demanded I get a real job anyway? Neither of them could answer that question, and their silence told me everything I needed to know. The bank sent us a foreclosure notice, my mother said quietly. We have 30 days. That's unfortunate, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. I guess you'll need to figure out a solution. I turned to go back inside, but my father's voice stopped me. Jenna, please, we're begging you. For a moment, I almost relented, but then I remembered the look of disappointment in his eyes when I told them about leaving my corporate job, my mother's harsh words, the way they had dismissed years of my success. You made your choice, I said. Now live with it. The consequences for my parents were swift and unforgiving. Within 6 weeks, they lost the house they had lived in for 15 years. Their pride, which had seemed so important when they were rejecting my life choices, crumbled as they were forced to move into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. My father, who had always carried himself with quiet dignity, looked broken whenever I saw him around town. My mother, who had been the social center of their neighborhood, became a recluse, too ashamed to face friends who might ask about their sudden downsize. Tyler, caught between loyalty to our parents and understanding of my position, watched helplessly as our family disintegrated under the weight of pride and missed opportunities. As I built my business into a 6-figure enterprise and moved into a beautiful downtown loft, I often reflected on the strange power of silence and consequence. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't what you do, it's what you choose not to do, and what that choice reveals about the people who never truly saw your worth. You're just a burden, my dad shouted, his voice echoing through our Phoenix dining room. I stood there, stunned, my birthday cake still untouched on the table. The candles flickered like my hopes for a normal family celebration. It was supposed to be a happy day, my 26th birthday. But instead, I was watching my father's face twist with disgust as he stared at me. My name is Tessa Morgan, and I work as a remote data analyst for Crimson Harbor Group, one of the largest logistics companies in the country. I had been living back home in Phoenix for the past 2 years, helping my family through what they called temporary financial difficulties. What I didn't realize was how temporary my welcome would be. Did you hear me? Dad continued, his voice getting louder. All you do is sit in that room all day, pretending to work on your computer. Meanwhile, your mother and I are struggling to keep this house running, and your brother Tyler needs money for his business ventures. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I had been quietly paying their credit card bills for months, that my pretend work was earning me over $4,000 a month, that without my contributions, they would have lost the house already. But something in his eyes told me this wasn't the time for explanations. Robert, maybe we should talk about this later, my mom, Patricia, said softly from the kitchen doorway. Her voice carried that familiar tone of someone trying to keep the peace while secretly agreeing with the aggressor. No, Patricia. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around her. She needs to hear this. Dad turned back to me, his finger pointing accusingly. You think because you went to college that you're better than us? Well, let me tell you something. Your fancy degree hasn't done much for you, has it? Living at home at 26 like some kind of failure. The words stung, because part of me had wondered the same thing. But I stayed because they needed help, because Tyler kept asking for money for his guaranteed investment opportunities, because Mom mentioned how stressed Dad was about the bills. I thought I was being a good daughter. I contribute to this household, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad laughed, but there was no humor in it. Contribute? You eat our food, use our electricity, take up space. What exactly do you contribute? The irony was suffocating. In my laptop bag, just feet away, were the bank statements showing the payments I had been making. The credit cards in Dad's wallet, the ones Mom used for groceries, Tyler's gas card. I had been covering the minimum payments and often much more. But looking at their faces now, I realized they had no idea. They thought I was just their unemployed daughter, living off their generosity instead of the other way around. Something dark flickered in my mind as I watched Dad's satisfied expression. If they wanted to see what life looked like without my burden, maybe it was time to show them. Growing up, I had always been the responsible one. While Tyler spent his teenage years getting into trouble and charming his way out of consequences, I focused on my studies. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mathematics and landed my first job at a tech startup before I was 22. When the startup was acquired by Crimson Harbor Group, they offered me a remote position that paid incredibly well. The decision to move back home came after a series of late-night phone calls from Mom. "Your father is so stressed about money," she would say. "Tyler's business needs some startup capital, and with the mortgage and everything." Her voice would trail off, heavy with unspoken expectations. I told myself it was temporary. I would help them get back on their feet, save some money myself, and then find my own place. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly I would become invisible in my own family's financial picture. It started small. Tyler mentioned his credit card was maxed out, and could I help with a payment just this once? Dad's business credit line got declined at a client dinner. Could I cover it? Mom's store card was overdue, and she was embarrassed to tell Dad. Each time they promised to pay me back, and each time I said yes. Within 6 months, I was essentially managing their entire credit portfolio. I had my own tracking spreadsheet, 7 different cards, 2 car loans, and the mortgage. I paid minimums on everything and tried to chip away at the principal when my paycheck allowed. They never asked how I was managing it all on what they assumed was unemployment benefits. The strange part was how they treated me despite my contributions. Dad would make comments about me living like a teenager in their house. Mom would sigh about having an extra mouth to feed. Tyler would joke about his freeloader sister when his friends came over. I told myself they didn't mean it, that they were just stressed about money. But deep down, I started to resent the way they spoke about me, as if I was some kind of charity case they were generously supporting. The warning signs were there. Last month, Tyler had mentioned something about the 3 of them wanting to downsize, and maybe I should start looking for my own place. Dad had become increasingly critical of my work schedule, questioning why I spent so much time on my computer if I wasn't bringing in real money. Mom had started making pointed comments about independence and responsibility, but I ignored the signs because I thought I was helping. I thought that's what family did for each other. I thought that love and loyalty would be enough to bridge the gap between their perception and reality. I was wrong. Looking at Dad's face now, twisted with contempt and frustration, I realized they had never seen me as their daughter who was sacrificing to help them. They saw me as dead weight, and they had decided it was time to cut me loose. The birthday cake sat melting on the table, and I wondered if this would be the last time I tried to save them from themselves. "I think it's time you found your own place," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't look at me directly, instead focusing on wiping down the already clean kitchen counter. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think it would be best for everyone if you moved on." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had been expecting something like this since Dad's outburst, but hearing it from Mom made it real. Tyler stood in the doorway, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. His expression was smug, like he had been waiting for this moment. When? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Well, Dad interjected, we were thinking tonight would be good. No point in dragging this out. Tonight, my birthday. They wanted me gone on my birthday. I looked around the living room where I had spent the last 2 years, at the bills scattered on Dad's desk that I had been secretly managing, at the family photos where I smiled obliviously next to people who apparently saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. I see, I said. I'll pack my things. Don't make this dramatic, Tyler said. It's not personal. You're 26, Tessa. Most people our age have been on their own for years. I almost laughed. Tyler was 28 and had moved back home twice in the past 5 years. Each time, Mom and Dad welcomed him with open arms and helped him get back on his feet. But apparently that grace didn't extend to daughters who actually contributed financially. You're right, I said. I should have been on my own years ago. As I walked to my room, I could hear them talking in the kitchen, their voices lighter now, almost relieved. Dad was already making plans for converting my room into Tyler's home office. Mom was talking about how nice it would be to have the house back to just the 3 of them. I sat on my bed and opened my laptop. The banking app loaded, showing my checking account balance and the linked credit accounts I'd been managing. 7 credit cards, all with my bank account set up for automatic payments. All of them currently in good standing because of my diligence. For 2 years, I had been the invisible safety net keeping their financial lives from collapsing. I had sacrificed my own independence, my own apartment fund, my own dreams of traveling and building my own life, all to make sure they didn't drown in debt. And their response was to throw me out on my birthday, because I was a burden. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the account management options. Each credit card had my information as the authorized payer. With a few clicks, I could remove my bank account from their automatic payment systems. With a few more clicks, I could freeze the cards entirely, claiming security concerns. They wanted to see what life looked like without their burden. Maybe it was time to show them exactly what that meant. The thought should have scared me, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. For the first time in 2 years, I was about to make a decision based on what I wanted, not what they needed. I began to type. I spent the next 3 hours methodically packing my life into boxes while my family celebrated downstairs. Through my bedroom floor, I could hear Tyler telling some story that made Dad laugh, really laugh, in a way I hadn't heard in months. Mom was humming while she cleaned up the birthday cake that never got eaten. The sound of their happiness at my departure was more painful than any of Dad's cruel words. Around midnight, I carried my boxes to my car. No one offered to help. Dad was watching television, Mom was reading in bed, and Tyler had gone out with friends. I might as well have been a ghost for all the attention they paid to my leaving. As I loaded the last box, Tyler came home. He walked past me without a word, then stopped at the front door. "You'll thank us for this someday," he said. "You were getting too comfortable. This will be good for you." I wanted to tell him about the spreadsheet on my laptop, about the $1,400 I had transferred to his credit card just last week when he called crying about missing a payment. I wanted to show him the bank statements proving I had been covering his car insurance for 8 months. Instead, I just nodded. "You're probably right," I said. The cheap motel room I checked into smelled like industrial cleaner and disappointment. I sat on the scratchy bedspread with my laptop open, staring at the banking interface. It was 2 a.m., and I was finally alone with my thoughts and the full scope of what I had been doing for my family. I pulled up my personal spreadsheet and calculated the total. Over $34,000 I had paid toward their debts in the past 2 years. Minimum payments, overdraft fees, late charges, interest. I had covered it all. My own savings account, which should have been enough for a down payment on a house, was nearly empty. The credit card companies made it easy to remove myself as an authorized payer. A few security questions, a couple of clicks, and suddenly their automatic payment systems had no funding source. I didn't cancel the cards entirely. That seemed too cruel. I just removed my financial responsibility for their choices. But as I worked through each account, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Tyler's business credit card, the one he claimed was for legitimate investments, had charges I had never seen before. Luxury hotels in Las Vegas, high-end restaurants, a jewelry store purchase for $8,000. All of it paid for with money I had been contributing. I dug deeper into Dad's accounts and found similar patterns. Business dinners that were actually expensive steakhouse visits with his golf buddies. Office supplies that were clearly personal electronics. Mom's store card showed purchases for designer handbags and spa treatments, all while she told me they were struggling to make ends meet. They hadn't been struggling. They had been living beyond their means and using my money to subsidize their lifestyle while treating me like a charity case. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Hope you find a nice place. We love you." I stared at the message for a long time. If they loved me, why had they made me feel like such a burden? If they cared about my well-being, why had they never asked about my job or my income? Why had they taken my help for granted while making me feel ashamed for needing a place to live? I turned off my phone and closed my laptop. Tomorrow, I would drive to San Diego and start over. Crimson Harbor Group had been asking me to relocate to their West Coast offices for months, offering a significant salary increase and relocation assistance. I had turned them down because I thought my family needed me. It was time to start thinking about what I needed. As I tried to fall asleep on the uncomfortable motel bed, I wondered how long it would take them to realize what had happened. Their credit cards would start declining within days. The automatic payments that had been keeping them afloat would bounce. Their carefully maintained credit scores would begin to crumble. Part of me felt guilty for what was coming, but a larger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. I woke up to 17 missed calls. It was 7 a.m., exactly 12 hours since I had left, and my phone was buzzing constantly. Dad, Mom, Tyler. They were taking turns calling, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. I listened to them while I packed my remaining toiletries. "Tessa, honey, call me back. There's been some kind of mistake with the credit cards." Mom's voice was tight with worry. "Tessa, what the hell did you do? My card got declined at breakfast." Tyler, angry but not yet understanding the scope of the problem. "Call me back immediately. We need to talk." Dad, using his authority voice like I was still a child who could be commanded. I drove toward San Diego while they called. 3 hours into the drive, the voicemails became more desperate. "Tessa, please, I know you're upset, but we can work this out. Just call me back." Mom, now clearly panicking. "The bank says you removed yourself from all the accounts. What the hell does that mean?" Tyler, finally beginning to understand. "You vindictive little... Just call me back. Now." Dad, no longer trying to hide his rage. I pulled over at a gas station and finally answered when Mom called for the 4th time that hour. "Tessa, thank God. Where are you? What happened with the credit cards?" "I'm not responsible for your credit cards anymore," I said calmly. "I removed my bank account from your automatic payment systems." Silence. Then, "What do you mean, your bank account?" "Mom, who did you think was paying those bills?" Another long pause. "Your father... I thought... We assumed... You assumed wrong. But how... Where did you get that kind of money?" I almost laughed. "From my job, the one Dad thinks is pretend, the one Tyler jokes about. I've been working remotely for Crimson Harbor Group for 2 years, making $55,000 a year. I've been paying your bills because I thought you needed help." I could hear her talking to someone in the background, probably Dad. When she came back on the line, her voice was small. "Tessa, we didn't know. If you had just told us... I tried to tell you. Remember when I said I was contributing to the household? When I mentioned my work? You never listened because you had already decided I was a failure living off your charity. That's not... We didn't mean... Yes, you did. And that's fine. But I'm not your safety net anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone again. The drive to San Diego gave me time to think about the magnitude of what I had just done. Without my payments, their credit cards would start declining immediately. Late fees would kick in within days. Their credit scores would tank within weeks. The lifestyle they had been living, the expensive dinners, the shopping trips, Tyler's business expenses, would come to an abrupt halt. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. They had been living off my income while treating me like a burden. They had been using my money to fund their luxuries while making me feel ashamed for needing a place to live. They had thrown me out on my birthday. After 2 years of financial support, they didn't even realize they were receiving. When I reached San Diego that evening, I called my contact at Crimson Harbor Group's West Coast office. Tessa, I was hoping to hear from you. Are you reconsidering our offer? I am. How quickly could I start? How about Monday? We've been holding a position for you. When can you be here? I'm already here. The relief in my manager's voice was palpable. Perfect. Let me help you find a place. We have corporate housing available, and there's a great apartment complex near the office with immediate availability. For the first time in months, I felt like someone wanted me around. By Sunday, I had a furnished one-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the beach. By Monday, I was sitting in my new office, signing paperwork for a position that paid nearly $70,000 a year. By Tuesday, I had turned my phone back on to discover 43 missed calls and 27 text messages. The messages painted a picture of escalating panic back in Phoenix. Saturday. Call us back. This is serious. Dad. Sunday. Tessa. Your father had to cancel his golf weekend because his card was declined. Please call. Mom. Monday. My car payment bounced. I could lose my car. Call me. Tyler. Tuesday. The mortgage payment failed. We could lose the house. Where are you? Dad. Wednesday. I know you're angry, but this is going too far. Call your mother. Tyler. I sat in my new office, looking out at the San Diego skyline, and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness where my family anxiety used to live. My new colleague, Jessica, knocked on my door. How are you settling in? Better than expected, I said. It's nice to be wanted somewhere. Well, you came highly recommended. The Phoenix team spoke very highly of your work. They were sad to lose you. Their loss, I said, and meant it. That evening, I walked to the beach and called my family back. Dad answered on the first ring. Tessa, where the hell are you? San Diego. San Diego? What are you doing there? I got a promotion. I moved. I could hear him talking to Mom and Tyler in the background. When he came back on the line, his tone had shifted to the fake friendly voice he used when he wanted something. That's great, honey. Congratulations. Listen, we need to talk about this credit card situation. There's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I removed myself from your payment systems because I no longer live with you and I'm no longer responsible for your bills. But Tessa, Mom's voice now, apparently on speaker, we didn't realize you were paying those bills. If we had known, you would have what? Treated me better? Not thrown me out on my birthday? Not called me a burden for 2 years? Silence. We were stressed, Tyler said finally. We didn't mean those things. Yes, you did. And that's okay. You wanted me to be independent, and now I am. But the house, Dad said, desperation creeping into his voice. The mortgage payment failed. We could lose everything. Then I guess you'll need to figure out how to pay your own bills. Tessa, Mom was crying now. We're family. Families help each other. You're right, I said. Families do help each other. For 2 years, I helped you. I paid your bills, covered your emergencies, and subsidized your lifestyle. And in return, you made me feel like a failure and threw me out the moment you decided I was inconvenient. We'll make it up to you, Dad said quickly. Come home. We'll talk this through. I am home, I said, looking out at the ocean. This is my home now. I hung up and blocked their numbers. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through my windows and the sound of waves in the distance. For the first time in 2 years, I checked my bank account without anxiety. My money was mine again. My life was mine again. I made coffee and sat on my small balcony, watching surfers catch the morning waves. My phone buzzed with an email from my new manager, praising a project I had completed the day before and asking if I'd be interested in leading a larger initiative. I smiled and started typing my response. It felt good to be valued for what I contributed, rather than resented for what I needed. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, full of possibilities I had forgotten I was allowed to want. 3 weeks into my new life in San Diego, I got the call I had been expecting. It was from Aunt Diane, Dad's sister, who lived in Tucson. Tessa, honey, I heard about what happened. Your parents are in quite a mess. I sipped my morning coffee from my balcony, watching joggers on the beach below. What kind of mess? Well, Diane's voice was careful. They had to sell Robert's truck to make the mortgage payment, and Tyler moved back in with them because he couldn't afford his apartment anymore. Patricia's been calling around the family, asking for loans. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite satisfaction, but a sense of completion. I see. She wanted me to call you. Said you weren't answering their calls. I'm not. Diane was quiet for a moment. Tessa, I know they hurt you, but they're family. Maybe there's a way to work this out. I had expected this call. In our family, women were always expected to be the peacemakers, to absorb the pain and smooth things over. I had been playing that role for 26 years. Aunt Diane, did they tell you I was paying their credit card bills for 2 years? What? No, Robert said you were unemployed. I wasn't unemployed. I was supporting them financially while they called me a burden and made me feel ashamed for needing a place to live. When I tried to tell them about my job, they dismissed it as not real work. Then they threw me out on my birthday. Another long pause. Oh, honey, I had no idea. They didn't want you to know because it didn't fit their narrative. They wanted to be the generous parents supporting their struggling daughter, not the struggling parents being supported by their successful daughter. Tessa, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. But I'm not fixing this for them. They made their choices. After I hung up, I realized something had shifted. The anger that had been burning in my chest for weeks was fading, replaced by something cleaner: indifference. They were no longer my problem to solve. 2 months later, I was promoted to senior data analyst with a corner office and a view of the harbor. My new salary was $85,000 a year, plus bonuses. I had started dating a marine biologist named Kyle, who thought my career was fascinating and never once questioned whether my work was real. The apartment complex where I lived had become my community. I knew my neighbors, joined the building's book club, and had season tickets to the local theater. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when Mom showed up. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find her sitting in the lobby of my building, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, standing up uncertainly. My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "What are you doing here, Mom?" "We need to talk. Can I come up?" Against my better judgment, I led her into my apartment. She looked around at my furniture, my view, my life, with a mixture of pride and confusion. "This is beautiful, Tessa. You've done well for yourself." "Thank you." She sat on my couch, twisting her hands in her lap. "We lost the house." I felt a stab of something. Grief, maybe, for the home I had grown up in. But it passed quickly. I'm sorry to hear that. We're living with your Uncle Gary now, all three of us in his guest room. That must be difficult. Tessa. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We were wrong. We were so wrong about everything. If we had known you were helping us, we never would have... You would have what? Treated me with respect? Asked about my life? Valued my contributions? Yes, she whispered. Mom, the problem wasn't that you didn't know I was paying your bills. The problem was that you didn't care enough to find out who I really was or what I was doing with my life. You had decided I was a failure, and that was easier than actually paying attention to me. She was crying now, and despite everything, it hurt to see. But I had learned the difference between feeling sorry for someone and feeling responsible for fixing their problems. I came here to ask you to come home, to help us get back on our feet. I looked out at the ocean, at the life I had built, at the future stretching ahead of me. Mom, I am home. 6 months later, I heard through Aunt Diane that Dad had filed for bankruptcy and Tyler was working at a call center. Mom had taken a job at a grocery store, her first job in 15 years. They had moved into a small rental house and were slowly rebuilding their lives. I felt a distant sadness for them, the way you might feel sad about strangers you read about in the newspaper. They were no longer the center of my emotional universe. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold, when Kyle called to tell me about a research expedition he'd been invited to join in Costa Rica. Want to come with me? He asked. I know you can work remotely from anywhere. I thought about the scared, angry girl who had driven out of Phoenix 7 months ago, carrying her life in boxes and her hurt in her heart. I thought about the family who had taught me that love came with conditions and respect had to be earned through suffering. Then I looked at my laptop, at my bank account with 6 months of expenses saved, at my calendar full of work I enjoyed, and people who valued my contributions. Yes, I said, I'd love to. As I hung up the phone, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't been about hurting them. It had been about refusing to hurt myself anymore. It had been about choosing my own life over their comfort, my own truth over their narratives, my own worth over their judgments. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, and for the first time in my life, I felt just as boundless. You need to be reasonable about this, Danielle. We're talking about our future here. Travis stood in our kitchen in Phoenix, his voice carrying that familiar edge that always made my stomach tighten. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the anger in his eyes as he held up the inheritance documents my grandmother had left me 6 months ago. My future, I corrected him, reaching for my coffee mug. This is my inheritance, Travis. My grandmother left it to me. My name is Danielle Frost. I'm 33 years old. And for the past 4 years, I've been married to a man who seemed to view every dollar I earned or inherited as his personal property. What started as small requests for help with his credit card bills had escalated into something much darker. Travis worked as a sales manager at North Peak Engineering, but his spending habits always outpaced his income. My job as a pediatric nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital provided steady income, but it was never enough for him. The inheritance from my grandmother's estate was substantial, $200,000 plus her property in Tucson. She had been a successful real estate investor who'd spent decades building her wealth. More importantly, she'd been the one person in my family who truly understood me. In her will, she'd made it crystal clear that the money was for me alone, not for any husband or future spouse. Don't be selfish, Travis snapped, slamming the papers down on the granite countertop. We could pay off my student loans, fix up this house, maybe even start a business. You're thinking like a single woman instead of a wife. I felt the familiar chill that ran down my spine whenever he used that tone. Travis, we've discussed this. The money is mine to decide what to do with. Discussed it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean you've made up your mind and refuse to listen to reason? That's not how marriage works, Danielle. The way he said my name, like it tasted bitter in his mouth, told me this conversation was about to get worse. I'd been hoping we could find a compromise, maybe use some of the money for home improvements while keeping the bulk of it in my personal account. But the look in Travis's eyes told me he wanted it all. I've been patient with you, he continued, moving closer. But this stubbornness has to stop. We're going to sit down with my family this weekend and figure out the best way to handle this money. No more games. Something in his voice made me pause. This wasn't just another argument about money. There was a planning quality to his words that hadn't been there before, like he'd already decided how this was going to end. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. Travis had always been controlling about finances, but it had started so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was normal relationship stuff. When we'd first gotten married, he'd suggested we open a joint account to make things easier. Within 6 months, he was questioning every purchase I made and insisting that all major financial decisions go through him first. The manipulation had been subtle at first. He'd make comments about how traditional wives handled money, or how his mother had always deferred to his father on financial matters. When I'd pushed back, he'd accuse me of not trusting him or not being committed to our marriage. Gradually, I'd found myself asking his permission for things that should have been my choice alone. My relationship with Travis's family had always been complicated. His mother, Beverly, had never warmed to me, and his brother Kevin seemed to view me as an outsider who'd never quite measure up to their family's standards. They lived in a sprawling house in Scottsdale and made sure everyone knew about their financial success. Kevin owned a chain of auto repair shops, and Beverly frequently reminded me that successful families stick together when it came to money. During family gatherings, I'd noticed how they discussed finances openly, debating investments and business opportunities like they were planning military campaigns. More than once, I'd caught them looking at me with calculation in their eyes, as if they were trying to figure out what I might be worth to them. The inheritance had changed everything. Within days of my grandmother's will being read, Travis's entire demeanor had shifted. He'd become more insistent, more demanding, and far less willing to take no for an answer. He'd started making comments about how family money should benefit the whole family, and how my grandmother would have wanted us to be smart about the windfall. "You don't understand business like we do," he'd said just last week. "Kevin and I have been talking, and we think there are some really good investment opportunities right now. Your grandmother's money could be the seed capital we need." The fact that he'd been discussing my inheritance with his brother without my knowledge had been the first real alarm bell. I'd confronted him about it, and he'd brushed off my concerns with his usual dismissive attitude. "We're family," he'd said. "Of course I'm going to talk to Kevin about important financial decisions. That's what successful people do. They get advice from other successful people." But I'd seen something different in his eyes during that conversation. Something calculating and cold that made me wonder if the man I'd married had ever really loved me, or if he'd just been waiting for an opportunity like this. Now, standing in our kitchen with the morning light making his expression look harsh and unfamiliar, I realized that whatever happened this weekend, our marriage would never be the same. The turning point came 3 days later when I discovered the folders hidden in Travis's home office. I'd gone in looking for our tax documents, something completely innocent, when I'd accidentally knocked over a stack of papers from his desk. As I bent to pick them up, I saw my name on several documents I'd never seen before. My hands were shaking as I read through what appeared to be preliminary paperwork for transferring assets. There were forms with my signature forged, bank account information I'd never provided, and most chilling of all, a document that looked suspiciously like a power of attorney that would give Travis complete control over my inheritance. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had he been planning to take my grandmother's money, but he'd been actively working to steal it from me. The dates on the documents showed he'd been planning this for weeks, possibly since the day the will had been read. I photographed everything with my phone, my heart racing as I heard his car pull into the driveway. By the time he walked through the front door, I'd managed to replace the papers exactly as I'd found them, but the damage to my trust was irreversible. "How was work?" he asked, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. "Fine," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Travis, about this weekend meeting with your family, what about it?" He was already moving toward the refrigerator, grabbing a beer with the casual confidence of a man who thought he had everything under control. "I just want to make sure I understand what we're discussing. You said we need to figure out the best way to handle the inheritance money." He turned to face me, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Satisfaction, maybe. Or anticipation. "Exactly. Kevin's been looking into some investment opportunities, and my parents have some ideas about property development. We just want to make sure you're making smart choices." The way he said "smart choices" made my skin crawl. It was the same tone he used when he was explaining why I was wrong about something. Patient, but condescending. "And if I don't agree with these smart choices?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Danielle. You're not a financial expert. None of us want to see you make mistakes with this kind of money. Your grandmother worked hard for it. Don't you want to honor her legacy by being responsible?" The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost doubted what I'd seen in his office. But the documents were real, and the cold calculation in his voice was real too. "Of course," I said, forcing myself to smile back. "I want to do the right thing." But as I watched him nod approvingly, I knew that whatever happened this weekend, I was walking into a trap. The question was whether I'd be ready for it. The weekend arrived with the kind of oppressive Arizona heat that made everything feel heavy and threatening. Travis had insisted on driving separately to his brother's house in Scottsdale, claiming he had errands to run first. As I pulled into Kevin's circular driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked alongside the usual family vehicles. Kevin's house was one of those sprawling Mediterranean-style homes that screamed success, complete with palm trees and a fountain that probably cost more than most people's cars. Beverly answered the door, wearing the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Danielle, dear, so glad you could make it. We're all so excited to help you with this inheritance situation." The way she said "help" made my stomach clench. I followed her through the marble foyer into Kevin's study, where I stopped short. This wasn't the casual family discussion Travis had described. 3 men in expensive suits sat around Kevin's mahogany conference table, briefcases open, legal documents spread across the surface. "Surprise," Travis said from behind me, his hand settling possessively on my lower back. "I thought it would be smart to have professional advice for such an important decision." Kevin stood up, his smile as cold as his mother's. "Danielle, meet Harold Vance, Thomas Reed, and Bradley Cooper, all very accomplished attorneys who specialize in estate planning and asset management." The oldest of the 3, Harold, extended his hand. "Mrs. Travis, we've heard wonderful things about your inheritance. Your husband and his family have asked us to help structure things in the most advantageous way possible." "Mrs. Travis." Not Mrs. Frost, not even Danielle. I was already being reduced to an extension of my husband. "I wasn't aware we needed 3 attorneys for a family discussion," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas, a thin man with calculating eyes, gestured toward the empty chair they'd obviously reserved for me. "These matters can be quite complex. We want to make sure all the legal bases are covered." As I sat down, I noticed the documents were already prepared. My name was typed at the bottom of multiple pages, with signature lines highlighted in yellow. They weren't here to advise me. They were here to process paperwork they'd already prepared. "Now then," Bradley said, sliding a thick folder across the table. We've taken the liberty of reviewing your situation and preparing some recommendations. The most efficient approach would be to establish a family trust with your husband as the primary trustee. That way, Harold added, the money can be managed professionally while still providing security for your future. I picked up the first document, scanning the dense legal language. Even with my limited legal knowledge, I could see what they were really proposing. Travis would have complete control over every penny, with the authority to make any investment or expenditure decisions he deemed appropriate. This gives Travis power of attorney over the entire inheritance, I said. It provides professional management, Thomas corrected smoothly. Your husband has demonstrated excellent financial judgment, and his family has extensive business experience. Beverly leaned forward from her position behind Travis's chair. Darling, we're just trying to protect you from making emotional decisions about such a large sum. Women can be so impulsive with money. The casual sexism hit me like a slap. Impulsive? You have to understand, Kevin said, his voice taking on the same patronizing tone Travis used. This kind of money requires sophisticated management. You're a nurse, a noble profession, of course, but you don't have the background to handle complex investments. Travis reached over and placed his hand on mine, squeezing just hard enough to be uncomfortable. Babe, we've talked about this. You know I only want what's best for us. But his eyes were sending a different message entirely. Sign it, they said. Don't make this difficult. I looked around the table at the 5 men and 1 woman who had orchestrated this ambush, all of them watching me with the patience of predators who knew their prey was trapped. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Harold replied, his smile never wavering. But perhaps we could walk through the basic structure first, just so you understand what we're proposing. For the next hour, they tag-teamed me with explanations and justifications, each more condescending than the last. The trust structure they'd designed was elaborate and impressive sounding, but every clause funneled control away from me and toward Travis. They had answers for every concern I raised, responses that sounded reasonable but felt wrong. What if Travis and I divorce? I asked at one point. The question hung in the air like a bomb. Beverly's face went white, Kevin's jaw tightened, and Travis's hand on my arm became painful. Why would you even think about that? Travis asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Harold cleared his throat diplomatically. The trust structure actually provides protection in such unlikely scenarios. The assets would remain within the family unit that your grandmother intended to benefit. Family unit meaning Travis's family, I clarified. Meaning the family you joined when you married, Thomas corrected. Your grandmother's legacy would be preserved according to the original intent. It was masterfully manipulative. They were reframing my grandmother's bequest to me as somehow intended for Travis's family, even though she'd never met any of them, and had specifically structured her will to leave everything to me personally. I'd like to see the original language from my grandmother's will, I said. Bradley was already reaching into his briefcase. We have it right here, along with our legal interpretation of the testator's intent. But as he slid the documents across the table, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. These weren't copies of my grandmother's actual will. They were excerpts, carefully selected passages that had been taken out of context to support their narrative. This isn't the complete will, I said. We've highlighted the relevant sections, Kevin said quickly. The legal language can be confusing for laypeople. I want to see the entire document. Danielle, Travis's voice carried a warning. Don't be difficult. These people are trying to help us. But I was beginning to understand that this wasn't about helping anyone except Travis and his family. The elaborate legal presentation, the multiple attorneys, the carefully prepared documents. This was a coordinated effort to separate me from my inheritance through intimidation and manipulation. You know what? I said, standing up so suddenly that my chair rolled backward. I think I need to consult with my own attorney before making any decisions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harold exchanged glances with Thomas, who looked at Bradley. Kevin's face flushed red, and Beverly made a small, shocked sound. "Your own attorney?" Travis stood up too, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Why would you need your own attorney? We're all on the same side here." "Are we?" I asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like 5 people trying to pressure one person into signing away their inheritance." "That's ridiculous," Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. Harold tried to regain control of the situation. "Mrs. Travis, I understand this is overwhelming. Perhaps we could schedule another meeting next week, give you time to review everything more carefully." "Actually," I said, reaching for my purse, "I think I'm done reviewing for today." Travis grabbed my arm as I turned toward the door. "You're not leaving. We're going to settle this right now." The mask was finally slipping. The patient, reasonable husband was being replaced by someone harder and more desperate. "Let go of me," I said quietly. "Danielle, be smart about this," he said, his grip tightening. "You're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing me. Just sign the papers." For a moment, the room was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and checking the time, "I should mention that I brought someone too." The confusion on their faces was almost comical. Travis's grip on my arm loosened slightly. "What are you talking about?" Kevin demanded. "Well, when you told me this was going to be a family discussion, Travis, I thought it might be nice to have some professional advice of my own. You know, just to make sure I understood everything properly." I could see the panic starting to set in around the table. Harold leaned forward, his professional composure beginning to crack. "You didn't mention bringing legal representation," he said carefully. "Funny thing," I continued, walking toward the study's large windows that overlooked the front driveway. "Neither did you." A black SUV was pulling through the gates, followed by a smaller sedan. Both vehicles parked behind my car, and I watched with satisfaction as several people got out. "Who is that?" Beverly asked, her voice rising with alarm. "That would be Catherine Morrison, my attorney, along with her associate and a private investigator I hired last week." The silence that followed was deafening. Travis had gone completely white, and Kevin looked like he was about to be sick. "Private investigator?" Thomas asked weakly. "Oh, yes," I said, turning back to face the room. "You see, when I found those forged documents in Travis's office, the ones with my signature copied onto power of attorney forms, I thought it might be wise to understand exactly what I was dealing with." Travis made a choking sound. "You went through my office?" "I found them by accident, actually. But once I saw them, I photographed everything. Every forged signature, every unauthorized credit check, every document you've been preparing to steal my inheritance." The attorneys were gathering their papers with practiced speed, suddenly very interested in leaving. Harold stood up, his face professionally blank. "I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of this meeting," he said. "Oh, I don't think there was any miscommunication at all," I replied. "I think this was exactly what it appeared to be, an attempted financial fraud." Kevin found his voice. "Now wait just a minute. We were trying to help." "By forging my signature? By preparing documents without my knowledge? By setting up this ambush with 3 attorneys to pressure me into signing away my inheritance?" The front door chimed, and I heard footsteps in the marble foyer. Catherine Morrison appeared in the doorway of the study, a tall woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Behind her were a younger man carrying a briefcase and a woman with a camera. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important." Beverly made a small, strangled sound. Travis had sunk back into his chair, staring at the table. "Not at all," I said. In fact, your timing is perfect. We were just discussing some documents that I think you'll find very interesting. Catherine's associate began unpacking files and a laptop, while the investigator started taking photographs of the room, the documents on the table, and the thoroughly rattled attorneys. Now then, Catherine said, settling into a chair with the confidence of someone who owned whatever room she entered. I believe we have some fraud charges to discuss, don't we, Mr. Frost? Travis finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine fear. Before we begin, Catherine said, opening her briefcase with deliberate precision, I should inform everyone present that this conversation is being recorded, and that we have a court reporter standing by to document any admissions. The 3 hired attorneys were frantically packing their briefcases, clearly wanting to distance themselves from what was about to unfold. Harold was already backing toward the door. We were retained solely for estate planning advice, he said quickly. We had no knowledge of any improper documentation. Interesting, Catherine replied, pulling out a thick folder. Because according to our investigation, Mr. Reed here was paid a substantial retainer 3 weeks ago to prepare asset transfer documents that required personal information about my client that she never provided. Thomas Reed's face went ashen. I was given information by the client's husband. You assumed wrong, Catherine's associate interrupted, looking up from his laptop. We have evidence of 17 separate violations of legal ethics codes, including preparation of documents with forged signatures and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Kevin tried to regain some control of the situation. This is my house, and I'm asking all of you to leave immediately. Actually, the private investigator said, lowering her camera, we have a court order allowing us to collect evidence from this property. It seems Mr. Frost has been using this address for some interesting financial activities. Beverly made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. What kind of activities? Catherine smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Well, there's the matter of the shell corporation registered to this address, the one that was created to receive the funds from Mrs. Frost's inheritance. And then there's the loan application your son submitted using my client's assets as collateral, assets he doesn't legally have access to. Travis finally found his voice. This is insane. You can't prove any of this. Can I? Catherine pulled out a stack of photographs. These are images of documents from your home office, Mr. Frost. Documents with my client's forged signature, along with financial projections, showing how you plan to distribute her inheritance among your family members. She spread the photos across Kevin's conference table like playing cards. Bank routing numbers, investment accounts, even a timeline for liquidating your wife's grandmother's property. Very thorough planning, really. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Beverly's increasingly rapid breathing. The state of Arizona takes financial fraud very seriously, Catherine continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd won a lot of courtroom battles, particularly when it involves exploitation of domestic relationships and forgery of legal documents. She nodded to her associate, who began reading from his laptop. Travis Frost, you're being served with papers for divorce proceedings, criminal fraud charges, and a restraining order prohibiting you from accessing any of your wife's accounts or assets. You can't do this, Travis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Kevin Frost, the associate continued, you're being served with papers regarding the fraudulent business loan application and conspiracy charges. Kevin's face had gone from red to gray. I didn't know the signatures were forged. Your text messages suggest otherwise, the investigator said, consulting her notes. Particularly the one where you discussed getting Danielle to sign off on everything before she figures out what's happening. Beverly collapsed into a chair. This will ruin us. Our reputation. Kevin's business. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from my client, Catherine said coldly. I watched Travis as the full magnitude of his situation sank in. The confident, controlling man who'd been manipulating me for years looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his collapsed scheme. Danielle, he said, turning to me with desperate eyes. We can work this out. I never meant for things to go this far. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. You meant for them to go exactly this far. The only thing you didn't plan on was getting caught. Catherine stood up, gathering her papers. The divorce will be finalized within 2 weeks. My client will retain her full inheritance, plus the house, your car, and damages for emotional distress. This isn't over, Kevin said weakly. Yes, I replied, looking directly at Travis. It is. In the weeks that followed, the consequences for Travis and his family were swift and devastating. The criminal charges resulted in Travis losing his job at North Peak Engineering when his employer discovered the fraud allegations. Kevin's auto repair business suffered massive reputation damage when news of the conspiracy leaked to local media, forcing him to close 2 of his 5 locations. The State Bar Association opened investigations into the 3 attorneys who had participated in the scheme, with Harold Vance ultimately losing his license to practice law. Beverly's social standing in Scottsdale crumbled as word spread through their exclusive community about the family's attempted theft. Travis was forced to move into a cramped studio apartment in Tempe, struggling to find employment with fraud charges on his record, while Kevin faced financial ruin from both legal fees and the loss of business income. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house in Tucson, the one I'd bought with part of my grandmother's inheritance. The morning light streaming through the windows felt different here, warmer, more hopeful. I'd kept my job at Phoenix Children's Hospital but reduced my hours, using some of the inheritance money to pursue a master's degree in pediatric nursing. As I sipped my coffee in the peaceful silence of my own home, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. Travis had thought I would fold under pressure, that I'd be too intimidated or too naive to fight back. Instead, I'd discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, and I'd used every resource at my disposal to protect what was rightfully mine. The revenge hadn't just been about the money. It had been about reclaiming my voice, my independence, and my right to make my own choices.